Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yes, we'll
Okay.
Good morning, everyone, and greetings. I am Ria, and I will be your host for today's session on our virtual national conference. And the theme for this panel will be Addressing the Divide, the New Face of Inequality. This conference has been diligently curated by Policy Advocacy and Research team at Sarkari School in collaboration with Civil20 Chaupal and the research vertical of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts. C20 is one of the official engagement groups of G20. It provides a platform for civil society organizations around the world to voice people's aspiration with the world leaders in G20. C20 also aims to protect the essence of sector, promote social and economic development with the vision that no one should be left behind. Under the Indian presidency of G20 this year, Civil 20 remains committed to evidence based policy recommendations. The priority issues of that C20 will focus on solving are socioeconomic matters which touch daily lives of people, which include health, environment, technology, and seva, which means sense of service. It is my privilege to welcome you all to what we are hoping will be an amazing and interesting session. I would now like to call upon my team member Varsha to present a formal welcome address to our guests and introduce the organization. The stage is yours, Varsha.
Good morning, one and all present here. I would like to welcome you all to this panel discussion on addressing digital divide, the new face of inequality. I bid a very warm welcome to our mentors, our esteemed panel, my fellow teammates, and the viewers. It is my honor to welcome our distinguished speakers, Avni Arora, Shweta Sharma, and Himanshi Maggu, who have taken out valuable time to grace this event with their presence and share their knowledge and experience with us. Sarkari School, under the aegis of WeCitizens Foundation, is an initiative that seeks to bridge the distance between society and government schools in India. There exists today a shadow of stereotype around Sarkari schools and their impact, a poor narrative that overlooks their successes and focuses solely on their inadequacies. Sarkari School aims to shift this narrative by equipping the readers with facts and stories of resounding success and hope. It aspires to begin constructive dialogue between educators, policymakers, Sarkari school students, and teachers, amalgamating all ideas and efforts into feasible solutions towards social change. With a multitude of working projects like Project Gudia, Project Arogya, Project Vedana, Project Kahani Kosh, and Project Sambal beneath its wings, we at Sarkari School aim to uplift government school students. The Policy Advocacy and Research team brings together young policy enthusiasts and budding researchers who aspire to make a difference. Our strategy is to work on policy research pertaining to various topics relevant to education in India, and it aims to serve as a knowledge platform for teachers, bureaucrats, policymakers, and other stakeholders. We are sure that this session will greatly advance that aim. We are looking forward to learning from you all today. I hope this discussion inspires all our viewers to learn, grow, and aspire to bring change. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Varsha, for this warm welcome and telling us more about Sarkari School and its journey towards educational equity. But before we proceed further, I'd like to call upon Shrestha to tell us little about the conference and the topic of this panel.
I will go ahead with that. The globalized world that we live in today reflects the truth and inherent in Indian ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Sustainable Development Goals 2030, which have underpinned the global and national policy discourse since their adoption in 2015 and will continue to dominate conversation and will continue to dominate conversation around for the coming decades are based on recognizing the power of international cooperation. One world, one family, one future, as the theme of India's G20 presidency reiterates the sentiment that local problems can benefit from global solutions. It is this spirit of promoting debate, deliberation, and discussion regarding policy challenges that Sarkari School WeCitizen Foundation, in association with Civil20 Chaupal, brings to you National Conference on Education through a G20 lens. The overarching theme for this year is role of multilateral and bilateral international collaboration in bringing about education reforms. By improving the quality of education, reducing inequality, and understanding the process of multilateral lateral partnerships in impacting the reform, with a special focus on practices and experiences of G20. Education is a great liberator, but as a mode of learning moves from traditional brick and mortar to digital, there is a need to assess digital divide. The digital divide spans three main dimensions: accessibility, accessibility to digital devices, accessibility to uninterrupted internet connection, and affordability to access internet. Experience from many low income developing nations indicates an increase in digital divide, especially in the post pandemic era. It is estimated that 66% of world's population has access to internet and 34% lacks access. But even among those who have internet access, not everyone is equally able to benefit from it. The existing worldwide trends indicate a continuous increase in digital divide. The available data set shows that almost half of India's population does not have a stable internet connection. The digital divide is not plain and simple because of existing gaps in usage and availability of infrastructure. There has been a skewed uptake in the number of smartphone users worldwide because it is largely concentrated in urban pockets and among male population. Digital divide has implications for G20 member nations because as a mode of education has become virtual, the ramifications further stretch to accessing employment opportunities. Access to internet is a basic human right. This panel aims to understand intricacies and implications of existing digital divide because in digital age, ensuring equality also correlates to ensuring access to information communication technology services. Yes. Um, so that is all about the theme and the theme of the conference and theme of this panel. So now, Chandralekha, can you please call our next guest? Um, yes, we have with us Avni ma'am today, who will be our first guest speaker for this session. Avni Arora is a dynamic policy professional who is founding member of WICCI, India EU Business Council, and was previously engaged with Center for New Economic Diplomacy at Observers Research Foundation. Her research centers digital inclusion for socio-economic transformation in South-South cooperation. Her expertise in analyzing the vast digital divide in post-pandemic world from a gender lens. She is a prominent voice in advocating policymaking. Now I would like to invite you, Avni ma'am. The stage is all yours, please.
Thank you, Ria. I'm audible, I hope. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
All
Yes.
right. All right. Thank you, Ria. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to join all of you in this important discussion today concerning the digital divide as the new face of inequality. I thank WeCitizens Foundation and Sarkari School for convening this timely event as India takes over its G20 presidency. So, in my discussion, I will be going over four main themes, uh, which would draw a landscape, the length and breadth of the gendered digital divide that India is currently facing, and I would try to cover the state of affairs according to my expertise. So, the four areas which I'll be touching on would be the global perspectives on digital education since the pandemic. Secondly, I would be talking about the barriers to a sustainable future, keeping in mind the sustainable development goals and how far we have progressed along those. Thirdly, I would be talking about India's G20 perspective and the gender digital divide. And I would be concluding with some proposed policy shifts. So, I would like to start with the global perspectives on digital education since the pandemic. As we all know, in the light of the pandemic, it has become increasingly clear that there are major barriers to digital learning. uh, I would like to support that with some data, wherein more than two-thirds of children globally are unable to access online learning in a report by UNICEF by 2021 due to school closures, due to state mandated lockdowns. Even though the digital divide existed even before the COVID 19 pandemic, 48% of the world's children and 98% and 90% of children in lower income countries were termed as learning poor. That is, they were unable to read and understand a simple text by the age of 10, according to World Bank estimates from 2019. So we know that the digital divide did persist, but it became much more apparent and it started affecting and creating a lot of more barriers since the pandemic, since everything, the three main things, such as education, payments, and work, transformed online. Uh, the global figures saw a rise to approximately 58% as a result of the pandemic, which is a huge number. I would now like to skip over to the barriers to a sustainable future. So, Sustainable Development 4 is an important goal in the SDG Agenda 2030 that pledges to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. It is hence imperative to recognize the importance of a meaningful access to digital technologies in educational settings. The Convention on Rights of Children and Gender Comment number 25 on children's rights in the digital environment points out that if digital inclusion is not achieved, then existing inequalities are likely to increase and obviously new ones may arise. There are multiple barriers related to connectivity, affordable data, and devices that are compounding factors that impede on an equitable access to digital learning. Moreover, parents' lack of digital literacy and literacy on the whole, and their reluctance to let the girl child in particular access to internet or even mobile phones are added obstacles which are only faced by women. I would now like to go over the perspective of India in its G20 presidency. So, India, as we all know, has pledged to focus on bringing the digital divide, especially in developing countries during the tenure of its G20 presidency, and ensuring greater benefits from digital technologies and transformation. The Indian education sector, as rightly pronounced, has seen a gradual slow shift from the regular rudimentary classroom education to a digital revolution and a digitized learning environment. The reforms proposed under the National Education Policy 2020 also emphasize on building digital literacy as one of the main skills. During the 2 to 3 years of the pandemic, digital learning has gone from an optional supplement to the elite to an essential medium for formal education for all. This is where the digital divide draws greater gulfs among those students who belong to privileged backgrounds and less privileged backgrounds. Obviously, that has a gender dimension. While some students had a smooth transition to the digital led education, there were multiple barriers that were faced by others. Some data that I could point to from Pratham Foundation has noted that 50% of India's students are going to government schools that lack this infrastructure and live in areas with very low digital penetration. 29% of government schools have functional computer facilities, and less than 12% have internet access. Smartphones, if accessible at all, are shared household items with limited availability of low speed internet. These numbers are shockingly low for female students who often face a gendered access to mobile phones and are thereby pushed out of schools permanently. And during the 2 to 3 years, definitely there were a lot more uh, female children who were pushed out of schools permanently in comparison to a male child, uh, whose education was obviously preferred over the female child. Now, coming over to the gender digital divide, the digital divide is more pronounced in low and middle income countries. South Asia and sub Saharan Africa have largest gender gaps in terms of mobile ownership. The divide in question is augmented by social structures at local levels that demonize the use of mobile phones for women and prevent technology penetration at all levels. If I talk about the G20 president Indonesia, which has handed over us to our presidency, they have managed to reduce their gender digital gap from 64% in 2018 to 74% in 2022. Uh, they have increased their mobile ownership from 64% to 74% in these 4 or 5 years. And about the gender digital divide, they have achieved and maintained the gender digital divide at 10%, which is driven largely by the use of phones by young women. India's gender digital gap is glaring, and the gap is inevitably means that women are deprived of opportunities in labor market where digital skills are in demand. So this, as you can see, this stems from not being able to access the mobile phones or internet or either, and then that stems from, and when the child is not able to get that digital education, digital literacy, or foster it in their environment during their education years, this obviously transforms into a digital gap while accessing livelihood opportunities. So a lot of women are not able to uh, access the digital skills that they require in order to be relevant in the in the labor force later. India has majorly three reasons that I would like to point out that have had a lasting impact on the digital divide. First is the rural-urban divide. Obviously, there is a very glaring, like a huge gulf of haves and have-nots in the rural and urban settings. Urban settings, more affluent settings, are obviously the are focus of a lot of major policy reforms, while there are some interventions that are going on the rural front as well. Secondly, there are income-based divides, which would stem from having lower costs of data and devices. And then lastly, there are social norms. uh, I would like to now conclude my argument with some scalable policy shifts that, according to me, could prove worthwhile in trying to lower the digital gap and making it a gender sensitive reform rather than a gender agnostic one. So, a report by Observer Research Foundation states policy shifts on four main fronts during the G20 presidency. So, trying to bring down the cost of broadband and one time charges on digital devices and services. This would require heavy private partnerships where local organization, conglomerates, and government structures collaborate to ensure implementation of digital services. These models are quite successful in Singapore, Mexico, Ireland, New Zealand, and other countries. Public funding can be used to expand broadband in rural areas. This would build the trust in technology that rural residents currently may lack. Thirdly, I would like to say that G20's digital economy ministerial declaration under the German G20 presidency in 2017 launched e-skills for girls initiative, which aimed at tackling the existing gender digital divide in LMICs, which are lower middle income countries. This is something that I feel that India's presidency could look at. And currently in India, there are in most countries there is a glaring digital gender digital gap in while talking about ICT policies. While there are a lot of data and research available, which point towards this gap. There are literally no efforts that are put into policy making so that these gaps are rectified. Um, I would like to conclude by saying that scaling up equitable digital learning requires action by governments, international organizations, civil society, academia, and private sector alike. Unlocking the digital learning for all children has the potential to create societies that are both more inclusive and more prosperous. As education systems recover from COVID 19 school closures, we can choose to reimagine education and address the learning crisis to expand opportunity for millions of children and young people, giving them a chance to learn and earn a decent living. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Avni ma'am, for sharing your insights with us and shedding light on the gender digital divide at global level and also at our country level also, and how this digital divide is affected by a rural-urban divide or income-based inequalities and social norms. And thank you for your suggestions and initiatives that you have given. So now I will call upon Shweta Sharma. Shweta Sharma has been working as an elementary school teacher with the government of Jharkhand for the last 18 years. At present, she is posted at MS Vivekanand. She is also a content developer and reviewer for the foundational literacy curriculum of Jharkhand. On the lines of the popular slogan, Ma, Mati, Manush, she believes that mother and mother tongue, mobile learning resources, and mobilization of alumni and community are the key to the achievement of learning outcomes, especially at the foundational stage. She has spearheaded not only in several ICT based learning initiatives such as her free English tutorial group called as Digi English Hub for students and alumni groups, but also associated with the UNODC Lockdown Learner Series, which was recognized as one of the 10 best innovative practices of 2020 by the UN. Over to you, Shweta ma'am.
Thank you, Chandralekha, for the introduction. And thanks to Sarkari School and the entire team for inviting a government school teacher as a part of the panel. I'm really blessed to be a part of this discussion today. And I'll try to focus on the ground reality. Thanks to Avni for giving us the global perspective and where the G20 lens stands right now. But I think I'll be going more with the ground work and whatever things I can see around me, and share my experiences with you all about the ICT journey, which, to be very honest, it began after the pandemic occurred in our nation. That was the time, point of realization. We felt the need, but the point of realization, it dawned on us exactly when the pandemic happened in this country and we were forced into a lockdown. To begin with, if we talk of our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has asked the G20 leaders to pledge that we should work towards digital inclusion over the next decade, and basically a data for development plan. But at the same time, as Ria had mentioned, that we are very much aware of the digital divide and the multiple divides which are existing in our nation. And it can be a wide range from economy to rural, urban, and to even the gender divide, which Avni has mentioned very particularly. And I support whatever she has shared with us. It is very obvious in the parts of country where we stay and we are working with the students and all. To begin with, let me share a part of my ICT journey with the students when the pandemic broke out. Because when the lockdown occurred in India, we had to shift to virtual learning because that was the only possible option, as the epidemic had forced shut down the classrooms. So the first thing which was on our mind was that what are the devices or what is the network through which we will be reaching out to the students who are sitting miles away from the school in their houses. And internet was definitely not an option for us because we knew that even if they had devices, within a few weeks they had no support to recharge their mobile phones. those geophones which they had with them, with those small screens, trying to look into those screens and trying to note down whatever we are discussing with them. Zoom classes or the online learning platforms came up quite later for these government school students. And if you compare the private school and the government schools here, it's there's a stark difference between the amenities or the infrastructure which we are giving out to them. So at that moment, we felt helpless for a while, and we were not sure how do I reach to the students who are there in my school. That was a huge number of 351, with almost 10% of the students having access to mobiles. So at that was the point when I reached out for a student volunteer support system. We had an alumni group which was a little active before, like pre-pandemic, and I felt that this is the network which can work for me. It hit upon me. So my daughter Medha and myself, both of we planned to reach out to these student volunteers, and instead of recharging the phones of the entire group of students, why not create nodal network students, so that we can reach out to those students and they in turn can create a branch below. So this is how it started. And luckily at the same time, UNODC was working on a lockdown learner series, and we could be a part of that whole series from Jharkhand. The only school I can say was from Jharkhand was the MS Vivekanand group. We joined in with Samarth Pathak, the communication officer of UNODC, and we created a WhatsApp group at the earliest. We had that full network. It took time, I think, but after a year, it was not just academics, it was not just e-content, it was all about your personal problems, it was all about counseling, it was all everything which we talk of in terms of cell. When we talk of socio-economic learning, even that was happening through these groups. And we were wondering that what phase this the students may be facing. It may be a kind of abuse, it may be a kind of economic support they are looking out for. So all these things occurred through those small WhatsApp groups. We realized the power of those groups which were there. The students had to collect notebooks from different areas, from different points which we had set up, and deliver it to the students at their own risk. They were masked up, they were vaccinated, but yet they had to put their life at stake to reach out to the students who were there without any digital devices to support their learning. And at that moment, I think one particular group which came out helpful was the mothers. The mothers whom we took up as mother mentors, they readily agreed to set up works for the students for whom the copies have to be delivered, especially for the primary students out there. And we were so blessed to have a whole group of mother mentors working simultaneously. And now they are very strong members of the Lockdown Learner Series group, which we are running in Devgar. And not only Devgar, it's a nationwide, you can say, a nationwide initiative, and has been praised also as one of the best practices in the 2020 panel of UN practices. But now the question arises that once the pandemic got over, there is a digital divide, but the parents were forced upon to buy the devices by any means, whether it be a EMI or whether it be an investment. But after the devices are there with them, they are again getting lost in the thought that what exactly are these devices to be put into use, other than exploring social media or other than using those Android devices as a calling device. So this is somewhere we need to think as teachers. If we are talking of 21st century skills, we are talking of blended teaching, we have to keep this urge going in the right direction. We have to use this point where we need the parents to realize the benefits. Like I always mention the Android device as a Allah din ka chirag to them. मैं कहती हूँ कि माताएं इस चीज को समझे. I always कीप अ वेरी गुड ओपन कॉन्वर्सेशन विद देम कि माताएं इसको समझे कि ये एक अल्लाह दिन का चिराग है ना, आप इसको घिसते हो तो कैसे इसमें से जिन निकलता है और आपकी सारी चीजें होती हैं. So this is exactly the Aladdin's magic lamp which you have got for your child, and you need to know its use as much as the child knows. So a parent control device can definitely be the better solution to a to an ICT device which is there in the hands of students who have no idea that where this world of learning may lead into, and it may always lead into a disruptive technology, it may lead into disruptive science. So everything is somewhere linked at this. So something which begins as a digital divide, if not monitored, if not guided properly, may again get converted into a mere digital luxury, where every other person in a household may have an Android device for the sake of having it, but they will have no idea that what this device can do for them and what benefits can be reaped from that device. So these are some concerns which I am facing as a teacher right now. And I look forward to the policies, because government is already framing so many policies. And if especially if I talk of the new education policy, where we are talking of the National Education Technology Forum, because it says it will help in the coordination of digital infrastructure, content, and capacity building. I hope it will be a milestone in education as promised by the new education policy. Similarly, if I talk of the promoting of learning content, so now NCERT is working on vernacular languages. So I feel this is the most needed thing, because if I talk of exploring the world of ICT, the one barrier which comes in is the language, because people who are not very fluent in English, they do not have a knowledge of English, or maybe Hindi, or those who are well versed in their local mother tongues, they are facing issues understanding the norms of ICT. So staying in a city where people may even confuse an ICT with an ITC, like people would often ask me that whether it's an ICT award you have got it or the ITC award, so you can understand what the real scenario is. We are working with a group of people who have yet to be shown the way to use ICT as a tool of education. ICT as a subject has a long way to go. As we're talking of ICT, why not put ICT in the curriculum? If I talk of my state specifically, we are yet to think upon a good roadmap, so that these students, these potentials can be converted into the next potential IT industry experts, which we are looking forward to for this particular marginalized society, you can say students or those who are economically deprived. They have good potential, but they need good guidance, and they need the right devices at a nominal price, which only the government policy can ensure at this level. And as per my vision on this policy and all, Ria, I'll be sharing as the session goes ahead. I'll put in more points which I feel that can be a possible solution to the problems which are being portrayed here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am, for highlighting the ground reality which the teachers are facing currently. And like as you correctly pointed out, that just having a device does not always imply that it is being used in a proper way. We also need to ensure that we are making the right use of technology if you're being digitally included. So, proceeding further, I'd like to call Chandralekha to introduce our next guest.
Yes, I agree with Ria also. Ma'am has pointed out that if digital divide is not handled properly, it will convert it into digital luxury. So I think that this point is very worth noting. So yes, now I invite Himanshi Maggu to share her views. Himanshi Maggu is working as a project officer in the Aspirational District Program (ADP) at Bachpan Bachao Andolan. She is a social and global development enthusiast. Her interest lies in the issues of children and women at the intersection of development and rights, particularly at Sustainable Development Goals of 4 and 16. Over to you, Himanshi ma'am.
Thank you, Chandralekha. Thank you so much for introducing me. And thank you, Sarkari School and WeCitizens Foundation for conducting this conference and having me. Sorry. So today I'll be talking about how COVID has impacted globally and in India, and then we'll touch upon the best practices followed by South Korea and what can be inherent and what would be the way forward through my perspective. So, digital topic specifically is a topic that needs to be addressed as it is a hot button issue that can be seen easily in our daily lives. The disparity in access to technology between different income groups is profoundly visible in the 21st century, and the breakdown increased drastically when COVID-19 hit us globally. So the pandemic has highlighted, you can say, and exacerbated the digital divide in education, as the students who lack access to technology and the internet are at a disadvantage in participating in remote areas, like as ma'am said. And specifically with low income people, the communities affected were the low income, marginalized groups, and the people with disabilities. So coming to the educational digital divide, students who are not exposed to technology and the internet will lack the digital literacy skills needed to be, thrive in in this modern world, and will have a severe impact on the growths and opportunities later. A digital divide is an economic and social inequality regarding access to the use of impact of ICT, that is information and communication technology. It's not just about the access to technology, it also involves differences in digital literacy, skills, and knowledge. We are living in a dynamic and changing world, one that involves young people, children, and young people to be critically informed and prepared to address a range of global sustainability challenges. One such challenge being digital divide. And basically, how now I would like to talk about how pandemic has affected education globally. So first of all, school closures, secondly, everyone was unprepared. Thirdly, it affected children's future well-being. So school closures due to COVID-19 have brought significant disruptions to education across Europe. It has given rise to learning losses and inequality. And at the peak of the pandemic, 45 countries in the Europe and Central Asia region closed their schools, affecting 185 million students. Given the abruptness of the situation, teachers and administration were unprepared for this transition and were forced to build emergency remote learning system almost immediately. And what they have done to reduce the reverse and long term negative effects, Ukraine and other affluent lower middle income countries need to implement learning recovery programs to protect the educational budget and prepare for future shocks by building back better, because on that way we can, revise, though we can protect, basically we can overcome the losses, and we can bridge the gap between the inequality. And how India was affected, so it was the dropouts during the post pandemic. The challenges was number of the school children in India have doubled from 32.2 million in the aftermath of the pandemic, with children from marginalized communities that were they were most disproportionately affected. So my recommendations would be on this, that we can have, we can bridge the courses to even out learning gaps of students who were out of school. We can develop inclusive campaigns, monetary aid, and establishing flexible pathways to bring back students into the school, because the drop rate was high, and it also leads to the child marriage. And we can see the Assam data recently. So, and next would be decline in learning outcomes in well-being. So students are facing more complex learning losses without the attainment of the prerequisite foundational abilities. And the socio-emotional development of children is also being affected due to limited social interactions during the school closure period. And then, as per ASCR annual status of education report 2020 wave 1, that is rural report, around 62% of children enrolled in schools had access to a smartphone during the lockdown period, and around 10 to 20% stakeholders found teaching and learning during COVID-19 as a difficult experience. So that was a negative impact of digital education on the physical and mental health of the children. And the challenges was not just for the students, it for the teachers as well. So COVID-19 has changed the norms for the teacher. They need to now shift their focus from how students learn or what student learns to why students learn. So and this was, and also the sustainability of private schools, that was the loss of revenue for private schools and non-payment of salary to the teachers. And there was also a challenge of affordability of connection. So financing hurdles related to digital infrastructure investment include capital costs, susceptibility to changes in market conditions, low rates of return in rural and remote areas. That was the chief cause of underdevelopment of ICT in any Indian states. That was like Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, and a lack of accurate data for making informed investment decisions. So access to finance is also a key challenge. G20 could play a role in strengthening infrastructure development through public and private financing and improving framework for policies to foster financing of digital infrastructure. Now I will touch upon the best practices. So let's take an example of South Korea, which is a role model, and how we can learn from them. So what has South Korea done as of now? So before the pandemic, the country had realized that 99% of 4G coverage with 5G under implementation, about 75% of households had access to computers, and 99.5% had internet access. So in that time, President Moon Jae-in's government has expended all efforts to ensure continuity in education in these challenging times. The government expanded public infrastructure by increasing e-learning platforms capacity to support millions of students from mere thousands. Furthermore, it also has helped to build teaching capability by providing teachers with piloting and peer mentoring programs. An example is the community of 10,000 representative teachers, which encourages teachers to share their ideas and information about online education. Government has also shared relevant guidelines and provided real-time support to teachers, parents, and students to use online education platforms, and has worked with the private sector to resolve the digital divide. And further, it provided reliable devices at zero cost to thousands of students and has offered this policy to educational institutions to ensure that the inclusion of disadvantaged students in online classes would be before. So this was the South Korea model that also has, praised by in G20 and by India as well. And now the G20 is committed to reimaging and rebuilding more resilient, effective, equitable, inclusive, and adaptive education systems that are better prepared for ongoing and future crises, and to support countries in the urgent design and implementation of recovery oriented policies to tackle the learning loss brought by the pandemic and other crises, to work towards the achievement of balance and harmonious oriented well-being. G20 also reaffirms its commitment to promoting knowledge sharing to address the diverse challenges in education, and to working together across the areas of universal quality education, digital technology in education, solidarity and partnership. So, challenges are emerging as we navigate the post COVID-19 scene. The transition period will have to be managed through a combination of digital and physical approaches to teaching and learning as well, and this blended pedagogy mechanism is called Pigital. It's PHYGITAL. That is going to be the way of the future. And educational institutions must embrace this as it allows flexible teaching and learning in the new world which we are entering. And the recommendation I would like to make for these challenges, basically, which we have faced, sorry, would be that as I have told you, that there was a decline in learning outcomes and well-being. So for that, we should focus on building foundational literacy and numeracy to expedite learning at higher levels, capacity building of teachers and time to time assessments to establish current level of students. And for the integration of digital based learning, we can have innovative financing mechanisms and partnerships to bridge access to digital infrastructure. We can improve classroom practices through remedial, hybrid, digital aided learning programs, aided learning exploration. And for the teachers, what we can have is that we can have appropriate resource allocation and capacity building initiatives for enabling teachers to incorporate frugal innovation. Pre-service and in-service training curriculum needs to be enhanced so that the teachers are able to deal with practical problems. And lastly, but not the least, enabling the ecosystem for financings to institutions and parents of private school going children, and the public private partnerships model for developing low cost private schools, basically, so that we can have a better understanding, or we can bridge the gap between this digital divide in terms of technology and in terms of education as well to the students, and yeah, make a world better.
Yes. Thank you so much, Himanshi ma'am, for addressing these important issues and also giving example of South Korea, in what way, like we as a country can evolve and adopt to the systems that we need and develop that kind of infrastructure to bring in digital inclusion to the marginalized sections of the community as much as possible. And also, I would like to thank you for especially mentioning the situation during the pandemic of child marriages and the problem which it has caused and like basically brought disparities to the society. So with that, I would like to now move on to the discussion round. So uh, our first question is for Avni ma'am. Within Asia Pacific, India has the widest gender gap in internet usage. And specifically in rural urban digital divide being the narrowest in Goa or northeastern states and widest in developed states. So, like, what should be the approach in bridging gender divide, and what should be our role as individuals to try to bridge gender-based digital divide?
Thank you, Ria. So, I would like to start by acknowledging that the question rightly points out to the digital divide and the digital divide that has a gender dimension even within India. There are a lot of statistics that point towards this, not just in digital divide, but there are intra country differences between the level of education, the payments that are going through, the obviously the digital divide, the number of women that are working. So this divide is, I would like to, I personally don't see that as just a manifestation of one kind of divide that stems, as I said, from a lot of social norms that are prevalent in these states. So when we talk about states like Goa and, for example, northeastern states that have influences from basically and also like policies that are much more egalitarian that way, we see that there is a glaring divide first of all, and then secondly, uh, there are models that these states are working on so that they can maybe lessen the divide so it's one at one level it is about the social norms, and secondly it is also about the policy shift that the state governments are funding. So obviously there are lessons to learn, but there are different demographies and different terrains that these states lie in. There are obviously there is a unifying factor here that if one state can do it, then why can't we? But there are differences based on the number of people that are educated there, the number of people that are working, what are the social norms that are governing, what are the costs of data services there, what and how well accepting to change these states are. So I personally think that state governments have a huge role to play here. So even though India is focusing on its G20 presidency, uh, I think that India should not forget to look inwards as well, because there are, as Shweta ma'am mentioned, and as Himanshi also mentioned, there are a lot of scalable models within India itself. So bridging that gap in the states should be the number one priority for India, to be an example or lead by example for other countries. There are a lot of scalable policy shifts that are available as well. So I think Indian approach here should be to look inwards and then find maybe some best practices and recommendations that would be uh, that would benefit the African nations, for example. So that would aid the South-South cooperation, because their demographics, their the challenges, the complex developmental challenges that these people are facing are the same. There, for example, there are Pratham Mind Sparks that these are a couple of scalable models that could be aid that could be used as an aid for digital learning. So this is one thing that I would like to point out, that India could look inwards, and then maybe if we look at the troika, the G20 troika that is there, uh, Indonesia, India, and Brazil, all of, like, if maybe Brazil has a different level of developmental challenges, but Indonesia and India, there is a a huge level of similarity that is going on, and similarly with African nations. So yeah, like that, I think should be the approach for India to take during its G20 presidency. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for addressing that, ma'am. We should truly look inwards, as you correctly pointed out. So, our next question is for Shweta, ma'am. I would like to know from you, ma'am, that though all schools in our country have an ICT period, but teachers as well as students don't pay as much attention to ICT as a core subject. Because when even I was in school, I was in a private school, but we used to have ICT period once or twice a year. So, what do you think that schools, teachers, and educational stakeholders like adopt in general, particularly school teachers, like what steps should they take to make ICT a more interesting subject for students as well?
Completely agree, Ria. Whatever you said right now, it's very true. So if I look at this report where the WEF global ranking shows India on a rank of 61 out of 141 nations, if you rank by the ICT adoption index. So here I feel that if we are talking of digital inclusion, we have to have the human-centered approach to it. Unless the community finds meaning in the use of that tools, in the integration of ICT, they will not come forward, they will not take interest in it. So when we talk of ICT as a software, as complicated programs, I have seen many parents rushing out the moment they hear the names of different programs like Java, Python, because they feel that these are not at all relevant to our daily struggles, to our daily problems, and they cannot stand up as a solution to our problems. So here I feel the human-centered approach where we can use digital tools in a meaningful way, that path needs to be shown to the students as well as to the parents alike. And that is where they will start using ICT as a tool, which we advocate as ICT awardees. That ICT not as a curriculum, but ICT as a tool, as a way to enhance the standards of our living, to make our daily jobs very easy at the touch of a finger. And at the same time, we also need to keep them informed about the cyber threats which can be avoided, because out of fear of a cyber threat, cyber safety, I see many parents backing out if the gender gap is seen in case of this case. It's also because somewhere they fear the revise and the world of internet and the kind of disruptive technologies which are around in that whole engine. So these are some problems which are very eminent, and as teachers we must guide the parents, we must use student volunteers, I feel, who can take up the front seat. They can come by it because we know that they are all digital natives right now. So the digital natives of this generation can act as a, you can say, leader for the immigrants, the generation which we are talking of. And we need a resource of women volunteers, because if women volunteers are provided devices, they are brought on a front footing, so they will give out a very good message to the people who feel that some way that the females may not be in a likely stage right now to handle the devices or to understand the good and the bad, as it is often stated by the teenager girls and the parents who are concerned about their well-being and all. So these are some things, and we need to prepare a common ICT roadmap for all the states, for India as a nation. As Avni rightly said, that why not look inward into the different states who are doing well? If I look at the roadmap of the southern states and I compare it with our state, I find a gap, a big gap in between. So it's high time we start thinking of going with the best practices and adopting it in our states, and then go further ahead and look at the global perspective which we are trying to seek right now.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your illuminating response. And also thank you for your suggestions. Like there must be a student volunteer and a women volunteers also. And in your speech also, you talked about mother volunteer and how they perform in ICT programs, which you have performed in your school and state. So, and you also raised a point that there should be a common ICT roadmap for all the states in our country. So, thank you so much, for ma'am. So, next we have a question for Himanshi, ma'am. So, ma'am, we all know that in 2020, the Court of India held that the right to access the internet is a fundamental right under Article 21. So, what role should all the educational stakeholders play to promote this basic right in remote and far off places where this digital divide played its role on the basis of caste or gender or creed? So,
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So, an important area for policy action, basically to providing the internet connections to the people, and important area for policy action was establishing national broadband plans with well-defined targets and reviewing them regularly. So these plans should, in my opinion, these plans should ideally address all of the key barriers to the development of high-speed networks and services identified, and we can include measurable targets to address the policy challenges associated with ensuring competition and investment, and to make this as a fundamental right in Article 19 it already has been done, and that the important technical enablers such as access to internet exchange points and spectrum, because the challenges was faced by the like in this role, basically availability of internet connections would be the was the nature of the infrastructure itself, which gives the rise to high barriers to entry, and in addition geography, administrative barriers, ambiguous regulations, and high capital expenditure was the spectrum, and in some countries a lack of basic infrastructure like electricity in rural areas, which was the stumbling blocks. So I guess that can be done, and to provide basically with the internet technology, with the internet connectivity to the people.
Yes. Thank you so much for addressing that issue, ma'am. Like, definitely, in remote rural areas, the only reason why there is no access to technology and network connectivity in general is because only reason is that it is not profitable for service providers to provide internet services in those areas. That is why we have a weak rural connectivity in many remote rural areas. So with that, I would like to announce that this session has concluded. It was a really great discussion, and I loved hearing to everybody's perspective, from a global perspective from Avni ma'am and Himanshi ma'am to a very local and ground reality from Shweta ma'am. So it was a very fascinating and interesting session, and I hope that it was knowledgeable for our wonderful audience as well. So, Chandralekha, please formally thank the guests for joining this session.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Ria. So, we are all delighted to express our gratitude and appreciation towards all the esteemed guests and dignitaries who have graced this conference with their wisdom and ideas. And thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. It was a truly thought provoking discussion, and it would not have been possible without you, our esteemed panelists. So, my heartfelt thanks to the organizing team also and Sarkari School for their hard work towards making this discussion a successful one, and our audience and listeners for actively being part of the conference and being with us the whole time. So we are really appreciate your participation, and once again thank you to everyone who has contributed towards making this event a success. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining Avni
Thank you
ma'am,
so
Himanshi
much.
ma'am,
Thank you so much
Shweta
for
ma'am.
having us.
It was really
Thank
a
you.
pleasure listening to you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.